Good morning, and I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching, the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. The Council supports the principle of transparency and encourages filming, recording, and taking photographs of its meetings that are open to the public. Members are advised that this meeting may therefore be filmed, recorded, or photographed. Please can I ask that all members turn off their mobile phones or turn them to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There's no fire alarm scheduled for today, so if it sounds, then please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble at the rear of the building at the far end of the car park. Toilets are available on the ground floor and refreshments are available outside the venue. Okay. So agenda item number 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you. I have apologies from Councillor Henry Batchelor and Councillor Graham Wilson is substituting, and apologies from David Connor and Councillor John Gowing is substituting.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Okay. Thank you. So item 3, we are being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting from the 19th of June, 2024. Does anybody have any comments, corrections on those minutes? Okay. So can I sign these as a correct record? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we come to the main part of the meeting, which is the application for the land at Streatley Hall Farm. Members, we have one application for determination before us today relating to a farm-based anaerobic digestion renewable facility, construction of a vehicular access road to the A1307 and associated infrastructure and landscaping at land at Streatley Hall Farm, Streatley End, West Wickham. Before I ask Helen Wass, the Principal Planning Officer and Development Management, to introduce the report, I want to take the opportunity to inform those who are attending today and watching the live stream that the committee undertook a site visit on Monday, the 15th of July. The visit took in various views of the site from the surrounding area. So I'll hand over to Helen to introduce the report.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. I'm going to use, as is usual, a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of it, there are some slides which the applicant has asked to be available for his presentation. That's purely for technical reasons that we can't have two running in parallel. It doesn't mean the council endorses his slides in any way. As Councillor Ray said, members did visit the site on Monday, so are familiar with the site and surroundings. And I'll assume, as always, that members have read the report, so I won't go through it in page by page detail. And it looks like this is not moving on. Bit of a time lag. Yeah. Okay, just to orientate people as a reminder, the application site, that's Streatley Hall Farm. And I don't think the cursor's showing up terribly well, is it? Streatley Hall Farm there, and the application site is the field just to the west. Running along almost through the centre of the slide is the A1307. Linton, Haverhill is just off site. We've tried that, and I'm afraid we've had a failure on that one. Does that make any difference? Yeah, it doesn't show all of the slide, but anyway, I can alter that as and when. Okay, the timeline. Just looking at the area in a little bit more detail, the planning application site is there roughly central, and surrounding it is the extent of Streatley Hall Farm itself, which is run in conjunction with Grange Farm, Bolsham, Park Farm, Horseheath, and it's proposed that they be the 50% contributors of the feedstock to the plant, in association with a partner estate at Bartlow, and these are the proposed routes. That's the A1307. Again, homing in a little bit more on the site itself, that's the planning application area. When we visited the site on Monday, we stood at Streatley Old Farmhouse and looked back towards the site, and from the site back towards the farmhouse, which is a listed building. It's proposed that a new access would be created from the A1307, which would cross the Roman Road, which is a bridleway, at an existing field gate. And if you could just keep in your mind, please, that point, that road crossroads T-junction there, and a point just inside that field. That photograph is taken from the corner of Webbs Road and the junction with Dean Road, looking across the application field site. The white building there is the gable end of Streatley Old Farmhouse. The larger, more modern farm buildings are clustered along there. And at the site visit, we walked up that field boundary, and we also looked at, there's a stream runs through the low point of the field, and the development is proposed to be outside the floodplain associated with that stream, and would start pretty much in line with the existing farm buildings and go up to almost where that wood starts. So would be the central section of that field. That photograph is taken from inside the field gate, from the bridleway, looking across the application field. The copse there is at the junction of Webbs Road and Dean Road, looking across towards Bolsham. That's the Bolsham Water Tower, and somewhere approximately there is viewpoint 14, which the applicant's landscape and visual impact assessment took as representative from, it was actually from a private house on that hill. Again, in a little bit more detail, the proposed layout of the site, close to the boundary with the existing farm buildings, would be 4 silage clamps. Here would be a straw barn. Building there would be a feedstock storage barn, and they would be the 4 digesters. When we looked on site, we noted that one of the largest of the fairly modern farm buildings in the farmyard is approximately 12 metres high to ridge. The proposed straw barn would be a little less than that, and the proposed feedstock building would be a little more than that, about 50 centimetres either way. The proposed digesters, their top height would be 16.1 metres. They would be positioned, cut into the slope, so that their top height matched the top height of the proposed feedstock store. The red compound is where the gas generation equipment would be. The larger lagoon would be the digestate store. That would be a clean water, surface water lagoon, and that would be a dirty water lagoon. There we are. This shows the proposed landscaping, and so it shows quite well the line of the stream through the field. It's proposed that there be a block of woodland in the corner of the field, gapping up of the existing hedgerow along the bridleway, new hedge along the extent of the boundary of the site, woodland, another woodland block surrounding the proposal there, and meadow along those 2 sides. This is an artist's impression of what the proposal would look like. That's Dean Road, Webbs Road, and the existing farm buildings would be just off picture. the silage clamps, the straw storage building, the feedstock store and the digesters with the lagoons, and showing the perimeter planting. These are section drawings which show how the site would be cut so that the digesters could be sunk lower base height than the proposed feedstock store, so that their top height would be the same. This section A would be up from along that boundary as if your back was to Webbs Road. So you'd see the gas generation infrastructure, the digesters, and behind it the feedstock store, and then to the left would be the straw store with the silage clamps in front. Section CC is from the opposite direction, as if you had your back to the Roman road, which shows how the two buildings would be sunk below existing ground levels. Section BB would be as if you had your back to the existing farm complex there. So just the tops of the silage clamps would be seen in the foreground in front of the digesters, feedstock building, straw building, and section DD would be as if your back was almost to Dean Road. And again, the digesters would appear on the left at a similar height to the feedstock store building and the straw store. Probably now, I think, appropriate just to do a quick recap of what the proposed development is. The proposal is for an anaerobic digestion plant, which would treat up to 75,000 tonnes per annum of agricultural waste and energy crops. At least half would be sourced from the applicant's farms, thereby making it compliant with the relevant part of Minerals and Waste Local Plan Policy 4. And 70% of the annual input would be from a 10-kilometre radius of the site. The anaerobic digestion process would produce 750 cubic metres per hour of biogas, a form of renewable energy, which would be exported to the gas grid. It would also produce digestate, which can be applied to land as an alternative to synthetic fertilisers. There's in principle policy support for renewable energy generation, both at a national and at a local plan level, as set out in paragraphs 9.1 and 9.2 of the officer report. But that is caveated by if the impacts of the development are or can be made acceptable. So that's what the later part of the report discusses, what those impacts are and the extent to which they would influence the decision. There have been quite a lot of representations, mostly objections to the proposal from individuals, and most of those give a highway or traffic related reason for that objection. And those transport objections really fall into three categories. One is safety implications for traffic using the A1307, also potentially in combination with a similar proposal that is Suffolk County Council is considering on the edge of Haverhill, which is a very similar principle. The second traffic element is the impact of the feedstock delivery traffic on minor country roads and going through villages, and disturbance that could cause to the residents in those villages. And thirdly, the impact on the HGV feedstock delivery traffic on walkers, cyclists and horse riders, including the racehorse training businesses who use the local country road network for leisure and business purposes. 10% of the feedstock would be directly from Streatley Hall Farm itself, for example, from the cattle sheds that we saw on site. And so that wouldn't use the public highway at all. And of the remaining 90%, 75% of that would use the proposed new access from the A1307. The average daily loads, and that was I think the table was included in the report, would be 18 loads per day, which would equate to 36 HGV movements per day. By the nature of the development, it would be seasonal, related to harvest times. And so the 4 peak harvest months, the daily peak would be 23 loads or 46 HGV movements. But that would be spread over potentially a very long day, as is the nature of harvesting. The proposed access road has been the subject of scrutiny by my colleagues, the County Council and its role as Highway Authority, and the design has been found to be acceptable to our highway engineers, and the Transport Assessment Team have considered the impact of the proposed development on the highway network and have raised no objection. I'll draw your attention to National Planning Policy Framework paragraph, it is 115, it's a typo in the report, that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. Another related matter is the Roman Road, and the British Horse Society are very concerned about the impact of the crossing of feedstock traffic on users, equestrian users of the Roman Road, which is a bridleway and also could be used by pedestrians. The County Council's Rights of Way team have looked at this, and they are satisfied with the applicant's proposed means to ensure that the safety of users of the bridleway is maintained. So what has been proposed is that the bridleway runs along there. The proposed new access would be through the existing gate into the application field, and it's proposed that on the bridleway at each side of the crossing there would be a warning sign, and then on the actual access road side there would be give way points and a give way sign, so that the traffic gives precedence to the users of the bridleway. The slides have shown the site in the context of its surroundings, and it fully acknowledged that parts of the proposed development, notably the tops of the digesters and the two large buildings, would be visible from some publicly accessible locations and from some private properties. It's also acknowledged that the proposed planting will not entirely screen the development. This is an adverse impact of the proposal and is one factor in the planning balance. Planning officers have afforded it moderate weight. Members visited the site, so will be able to come to their own conclusions on the weight that they would wish to give it. I also mentioned that we looked specifically at Streetley Old Farmhouse, the listed building, and there is some intervisibility of the site and the farmhouse. But the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning's Conservation Officer doesn't dispute that there's anything more than less than significant harm to the setting of the listed building, and so that's weighted accordingly in the planning balance. Turning now to nature conservation, Natural England did raise concerns about the impact on ammonia from the digestate store might have on the sites of special scientific interest, but are happy that if the digestate store is kept covered with ammonia extraction systems in place, that potential impact will be mitigated. Although this proposal came in before the legal requirement to deliver biodiversity net gain, there is planning policy, that was development plan policy in place, which required us to secure that. With the off-site planting, which is not very far off-site, it's within the same field. The council's ecologists believes that 35% biodiversity net gain would be achievable. The details of that could be secured by condition if planning permission is granted. Flood risk, we've touched on the fact that the proposal is next to a stream with its associated floodplain, but the proposed built development itself would be in flood zone 1. The lead local flood authority is satisfied that with detailed design, which again could be secured by condition, the development wouldn't increase the risk of flooding. Pollution of groundwater has been raised by a number of individual objectors, and the Environment Agency maintained an objection until the applicant had provided quite a lot of detailed information, particularly on the design of the digestate lagoon. The Environment Agency now is content that, subject to planning conditions, there wouldn't be a risk to groundwater. That's a matter that they would also scrutinise when, if planning permission was granted and the applicant also requires an environmental permit, the environmental permit would put that element of the development under scrutiny as well. And similarly, concerns about odour and air quality, they would be more appropriately dealt with in the environmental permit. And I just draw attention to National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 194, which does require planning authorities not to duplicate the role of other regulatory bodies, which in this case would be the Environment Agency and the environmental permit. If we can get the slide to move on. Okay, that really, I think, takes me to the conclusions and a planning balance, which is what you as the decision makers are being asked to undertake. In the officer's opinion, these factors weigh in favour of the proposal. The use of waste to generate renewable energy is the principle of that is supported by national and planning policy. So we have afforded it moderate to high weight. The fact that most of the feedstock would come from the host farm business in a 10-kilometre radius, we've afforded low weight for the reason that generally haulage costs are going to determine where a lot of particularly low value waste goes. So it's very unlikely that this sort of material would travel long distances anyway. And the biodiversity net gain, again, that's something that is to the fore in national and local policy, given that it seems very probable that 35% BNG could be achieved, which is a lot more than the 10% that the new legislation would require. We think that should be afforded moderate weight. There are quite a number of factors that are discussed in the report, but we believe that with mitigation, which will be secured either by the planning conditions or an environmental permit, these factors are neutral and don't really have a great deal of influence in either way. And finally, it is acknowledged that there are negatives. It's not necessary for a development proposal to fully comply with every policy. There needs to be a balance between the negatives and the positives, and these are the negatives that we've identified. Landscape and visual impact. We have acknowledged that the proposal would be visible from a number of private and public viewpoints. Some would be very distant, some such as the surrounding roads would be a lot closer to. So we've afforded that moderate weight. The setting of the grade 2 listed Streatley Hall farmhouse using the terminology of conservation, less than building conservation, less than substantial weight. The impact on the bridleway and its users, we believe that with the safety signage and mitigation, the impact would be small. So have afforded that low weight. And traffic from off-site feedstocks. There is concern about vehicles from the more remote farms on local roads, but those fields are producing crops at the moment. Those crops are being moved, and crop residues such as straw are being moved off those fields and will be using the local road network. So I think there may be some slight redistribution, but so we're affording that low weight. And it is acknowledged that a small area of high quality agricultural land would be lost for the footprint of the development. But given it is a very small amount in an area that is abundant with high quality agricultural land, we don't think that's significant. In conclusion, as the report says, I feel that this is a balance between the national interest of providing a source of renewable energy and a move away from fossil fuels. This proposal would be a small contribution to that. and a balance between any impacts, and those impacts are likely to be experienced locally. It's the officer's view that for the reasons set out in the report, the balance is in favour of granting planning permission. And that's where I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Before we move to the public speakers. Councillor.
Graham Wilson, and just for the benefit of members and the public watching, I used to be employed by the Environment Agency. I'm now retired, and therefore I don't appear on my register of interests as an employee of the Environment Agency. And I had nothing to do with environmental permitting when I was involved. Just to clarify, Helen, in the cross sections which you kindly indicated, the height of the fermenters or digesters is shown at the very maximum, isn't it? Because they go up and down depending on the amount of gas, and there's no that is the maximum that what they could be. It won't be anything higher. And I don't. And then the second question is, I don't think you showed us a picture or a layout of the axis onto the A1307. Are you comfortable that that is safe and secure and suitable for the movements of the traffic?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. The first point that I've just put up on the screen the design of the access onto the A1307. That has been looked at very carefully by the council's highway engineer and has gone through the stage 1 safety audit. We do have transport assessment team colleagues available if there are more detailed questions about highways and access. Then yes, your point about the digesters. On previous schemes that I've dealt with, I have been told that the dome is a membrane that can rise and fall according to how much gas is being generated. But it was explained to me on Monday that this one is likely to have some sort of inner structure, that the dome height is pretty fixed regardless of how much gas is in it. But to confirm, the 16.1 meters would be the highest it could be.
Okay, that's helpful. It's just that on page 10 of your report, it talks about a maximum dome height of 16.1 meters, implying it could be less, but you've clarified that it will be 16.1
Yeah.
and inside it'll go up and down. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just 2 comments. The first is just to clarify that I was unable to make the site visit on Monday, as I had previous commitments on behalf of the county. The second is if we could just hear the definitive view of the gas connection, because in some of the objections, there is concern that the gas is going to be tankered away to Hull, was identified as a destination. But then there's a lot of discussion about an actual physical connection that wouldn't require any tankering.
The applicant has confirmed that they've been making the necessary arrangements with the gas network operator. I mean, he will perhaps be able to answer in more detail. I think there's been a misunderstanding with the people who've made representations about tankering the gas to Hull. I think it's the CO2, of which there would be very few movements. There are very few places that use that and accept that. So I'm fairly sure that it's that would be going to the northeast, the CO2, not the gas.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions which follow up from the site visit, which I raised, Helen, which I hope you've got the answers. First is the nature of the vehicles which will be delivering feedstock to the site, and what those vehicles are, and whether the tractor trailer option is likely to be utilised by the applicant. And if it were utilised by the applicant, would it be captured under the condition as a heavy commercial vehicle, or is it an agricultural vehicle? And then my second question was, one of the striking things about the site is actually the gradient. And we raised the issue of what happens with the chalk, which is mentioned in the report, as to whether that would be kept off site or whether that would be removed during the construction phase.
Thank you. I did make inquiries about the status of tractors and trailers. I think the applicant has explained that generally they'll be using existing farm vehicles, and so I think it's likely to be a mixture of tractor and trailer and what I would call, you know, bulkers for moving the feedstock around. Highway officers believe that a tractor and trailer would be classified as an HGV. However, what we're suggesting is, if you were minded to grant planning permission, the condition that referred to HGVs, which was recommended condition 18, which I've just displayed, that we reword it so we put HGV or any other vehicle used to transport feedstocks, to remove any later ambiguity.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the material that would be excavated, there's very little, it's fairly thin soil, so there wouldn't be a lot of soil, but that was something that could be redeployed on the farm. But as you say, there would be into the chalk. My understanding is that would be retained and used on site where possible, in landscaping. If not, it would need to be removed. It's a fairly low grade material, so wouldn't have any mineral value. But if it had to be taken off site, it would be a cost to the developer to do that.
That would be potentially quite a substantial amount of material, wouldn't it?
Yes, I suppose yes, it could. It'd be part of the construction process. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted a clarification with regard to the access road. Would the access road be constructed prior to the construction of the particular site, i.e. so that no construction vehicles used the local roads during the construction of the development, which I felt was not clear in the report? I don't know whether you can enlighten me. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. The highway officers recommended that no feedstock be accepted to the development until the new access was completed. They didn't require it to be in place before the construction phase. So, and that's how I've phrased recommended condition 12.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Andrew Wood. I noticed from the comments that were made on the page, the main ones related to traffic movement, odour, chalk stream and bridleway. Reasonable consideration has certainly been given to the bridleway, giving it priority right of way. Local environment is being protected by retention of the capture of the byproduct from the chalk stream. On odour, I know that we shouldn't replicate the work of the Environment Agency, but does the Environment Agency take into account the odour caused in transportation of product to the site as well as on the site? And also I would ask, in relation to traffic movement, whilst the traffic is on the roads, in any case, movement to and from the fields concerned, there will be an element of concentration of that traffic on this location. And for the local area, has consideration been given to 106 funds for any compensation that might, excuse me, that might be needed?
Thank you. Your first point about odour, I'm fairly sure an environmental permit is, and anything that is controlled by it is limited to the installation itself. And so the transport getting to a site wouldn't be taken into account. Given the nature of what the feedstock would be, it's products that are in the, you know, the farming world anyway. So they would be traveling around the locality to get to whatever their current destination is. In terms of the impact from traffic emissions and the concentration in the local area, I suppose the most likely point would be the new concentration on the new access road. In the section on the report on air quality, I did address the issue of the point at which an air quality impact assessment is required for traffic emissions, and the number of vehicles that would be generated is well below that trigger. And in terms of 106 contributions, the situation for minerals and waste development is slightly different to housing that the district councils would deal with. Would only require a Section 106 agreement if it was needed to secure something that couldn't be secured by planning condition and was necessary to make the development acceptable. It's not like the scenario where a housing estate is generating new population and so a contribution to education places would be necessary. It's if there was an environmental a factor that needed to be mitigated that couldn't be secured by condition, and we don't believe there is in this case.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we now turn to the public speaking section. I have agreed that the objectors can now have 2 minutes each, which means the timing for the other participants will be increased to 6 minutes, but you don't have to take the full 6 minutes. So can I invite Councillor David Sargent of West Wickham Parish Council to address the meeting? Councillor Sargent, you have 6 minutes from the traffic light.
Thank you, Chair.
So is somebody operating that?
Okay. Good morning. I'm Councillor David Sargent, Vice Chairman of West Wickham Parish Council. But this morning I'm also representing the views of other local councils who unfortunately were notified of this agenda item too late to participate directly themselves, and I'd like to thank them for their inputs. We are disappointed that the planning officer has chosen to dismiss the concerns of 6 local parish councils, Haverhill Town Council, and over 100 individuals and households by recommending that this permission be granted. I'd like to review some of our grounds for objection this morning. At the heart of many of the local objections, have you heard, especially from Haverhill Town Council and the parishes along the A1307 corridor, is the safety of the proposed new junction with the A1307. We note the technical analysis and modelling of the transport assessment, and it says that the extra vehicles can be accommodated, and in capacity terms, I'm sure that is true. But our residents don't live in their modelled world. They use the A1307 on a daily basis. They sit in the congestion, they see the near misses, they recall the regular collisions, and some of those have had the most tragic of consequences for our community. Their opinion on whether large numbers of slow-moving heavy vehicles entering east and west onto the carriageway, whether that is unacceptably dangerous, is well informed through their experience. And I'd ask you to recall that the delivery of safety improvements on the A1307 and the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit was driven by community campaigning because of the horrific reputation that this road has. These HGVs will also cross the Roman Road bridleway, as you've heard. Our neighbourhood plan policy WWK8 states that proposals that impact adversely on the public enjoyment of rights of way will not normally be supported. The British Horse Society and the Ramblers Association do agree with us. This proposal does significantly impact on the enjoyment of that right of way by the public. And it's very difficult to explain to my community why a neighbourhood plan policy is being given such little weight, especially when an application has such widespread opposition. I think the very high level of opposition to anaerobic digester developments in general probably reflects its somewhat checkered history, which is sadly littered with underestimated impacts on local communities, accidents, and sometimes pollution incidents. For example, in 2011, the planning officer said in his guidance for the Biogen plant, which is just off the A505 near Baldock, he said he saw little prospect of adverse impacts in regard to odour due to the nature of the aerobic anaerobic process and odour mitigation measures. But we've driven past this facility, and frankly, more often than not, it smells, it stinks. Some of our parishioners visited the Euston biogas plant near Thetford, and they found the smell difficult to tolerate. If you Google biogas odour complaints, you'll find that our residents' concerns are legitimate. We agree with the Shared Planning Services landscape assessment that the landscape assessment provided does undervalue landscape character. We ask, what's the point in policy NH2 in the local plan, which explicitly seeks to respect, retain and enhance character if applications like this, which clearly do not, are to be approved? The parish council received an application for a solar energy proposal in 2021, which we supported because the developer worked with us to mitigate our concerns. But that application was actually turned down by the local planning authority on the basis of damage to landscape character and loss of agricultural land. The appeal was supported, the refusal was supported on appeal by the planning inspectorate. Yet this application is considerably more visually intrusive in a sensitive location, but has been recommended for approval. We're concerned about the sheer scale of this facility. It's not a typical small-scale on-farm AD facility with combined heat and power. It's industrial-scale gas generation. It will require more feedstock, more vehicle movements. It's exposed to an increasingly competitive market for feedstock in the local area. I note the condition that says that feedstock has to come from a local 10-kilometre radius, but what happens if that's simply economically unviable? There's a failed crop. Does our community believe that you will enforce the closure or the reduction in output of that plant, or will the conditions simply be varied? We just don't know. We wonder what will happen in 25 years' time when, toward the end of this facility's life, we presume the country will have moved on from the large-scale consumption of natural gas. Will the parish be left with 4 obsolete 16-metre-high digesters as some sort of monument to when we were so addicted to natural gas that we decided to use hundreds of acres of farmland to grow biocrops rather than food? Or, I mean, implausibly, policy CC2 Part 1C could be enforced, which says that a site should be restored after the operational life. But that would imply the extraction of 35,000 square meters of concrete slab from this site. I mean, the cost would be spectacular. We know that the reality will be somewhere between the two, but we don't know what it would be. But it will be with us for generations. The applicant at a public meeting last year suggested there would be a community fund to have some benefit to the community. That's not mentioned in this or implied by condition. I'd like to conclude by saying that addressing climate change in the long term requires taking the community with you and having their support. If you don't do that, you're just going to end up with distrust of the planning process and in the green energy transition. We're going to see in this area increasing demand for renewable energy infrastructure. And I'd like you to consider far more weight to local people's objections and work in a way that we can take communities with us in fighting climate change, not leaving them feel burdened by it. Thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Sargent. Are there any? So can I now invite Chris Covey to? Okay, question for Mr. Councillor Sargent.
Oh, that's fine. Sorry.
Apologies to drag you back.
No, that's okay.
You mentioned the community fund.
Yes.
Can you clarify if there have been any discussions at all with any of the communities in relation to the community fund?
The applicant maybe can provide detail on this when you speak to him. So we had a public meeting in our village hall on November the 18th last year, where the applicant suggested that there would be community fund in the order of, say, £10,000 per annum as some sort of compensation for supporting the facility in the community. This is a bit like the Wadlow Wind Farm Fund that some of you might be aware of, and seems to be commensurate with planning guidance that specifies that communities should see some benefit from supporting this infrastructure. I mean, I point out for those of you that aren't aware, we can't be offered discounted gas in West Wickham because we don't actually have a natural gas supply. So some sort of financial arrangement is probably the next best option.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, councillor Sargent.
Thank you.
So can I invite the applicant, Mr. Chris Covey, to address the meeting? Mr. Covey, you have 6 minutes to speak.
Committee members. Is it on? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair and committee members. Just to respond to some of Dave's comments to start with, because they're all well made. On traffic, I've heard a lot of the safety concerns. I'm not a traffic expert, but we currently use the exit at the Old Red Line in Horseheath to access the R107 with our heavy machinery because we can't make the Dean Road crossing work. It's no longer safe for large vehicles. So by having a dedicated entrance and exit to the A1307 seems more sensible, as it's designed for purpose, than what we're currently having to use for the farm. On the Roman Road crossing, we've tried to do our best to make sure that it suits any users of the Roman Road. And, you know, we're happy to help support and maintain the Roman Road as part of this application. I think it's very important that people can enjoy the countryside to the best of in combination with farming taking place. And so I'm always committed to that. As far as obsolescence of the plant could also be used for hydrogen generation, just a point of note. On odour, it will be a sealed system, and I'll be living closer to the plant than any of the other residents. So I'm 500 metres away from the plant, and the nearest village is 1.5 kilometres away. So if it smells, I'll smell it first, and people know whose door to knock on if there is a problem at all with the plant. As far as a community fund is concerned, I did talk about a community fund, and I have talked with members of the Buttercups preschools, where my youngest went to preschool, and the intention is to support them to the tune of £10,000 a year. But that'll be done via a memorial fund for my father, who died in December. I think that's the right way to do it. So it's sort of a targeted deployment of funds, but not necessarily via a committee, a community committee, but actually just simply for that one place. Just to go on to my sort of prepared points, which I'll whiz through. So Streatley Hall Farm proposes a farm-based anaerobic digestion facility just at our main farm complex that will produce clean renewable energy from energy crops and farm wastes that we currently produce, and the gas will be injected into the local gas network, the Cadent gas network. And we have discussed that with Cadent already via CNG for a plan to inject the gas. The location was subject to several criteria. We've tried to place it as close to the hub farm as possible in the middle of our land. This minimises distance travelled with wastes and agricultural products. Because it's on the west of the farm, it's away from West Wickham or Streatley End or Horseheath. And we've tried to achieve as much as we can with a form of co-location, even though the farm is not technically a waste facility. It's near where the large metal buildings are on the farm. It's on that side of the farm. The location on a hillside is not ideal or necessarily the most cost effective, but it does allow us to sink things down and make it at least blend into the landscape as well as we can. And of course, it is on grade 2 land because all of the land around the farm is grade 2. So we try to eliminate a lot of the issues with the prominence of the plant. I did go up to see where we have one resident that's recently on a recently built house that can see that side of the farm, and we have positioned the digesters so they are behind the copse of trees, so there is existing screening. So we've done our best to try to screen it from any sort of local viewpoints. So we have to do this because we're having to move the farm on. There's been a lot of disruption in the arable sector recently due to Brexit, due to regulations, due to volatility, due to the Ukraine war. So we need to broaden the crops that we can grow, and this facility will allow us to do that. It allows us to capture value from the energy market and crucially recycle our nutrients and put carbon back into the soil. So that's a big part of why we're doing this. It allows us to be more flexible and more profitable as a farm and continue to maintain the employment of the people we currently have and employ more people. And it just means that we can, as an agricultural operation, run a very high efficiency, high output agricultural operation whilst doing the right things for the natural environment. So it will allow us to reduce our fossil fuel-based fertilizer usage. It will allow us to produce a green storable fuel, that's biomethane, and we'll be able to sequester carbon dioxide in the soil. And I think there's a comment about the transport of CO2, but that's what's going up to the Humber to be hopefully sequestered under the North Sea. So it makes it a carbon negative plant. The scale of the plant's been carefully assessed, and it's smaller than we'd originally planned. We'd shrunk it down to fit with the green gas support scheme. It's in the smallest tier of the green gas support scheme. And we already transport a lot of the waste that would go into the plant, 35k to EPR Ely, for example, for the straw to be incinerated, or for example, we transport sugar beet to Bury St Edmunds. So I think we've tried to deal with things as well as possible and produce a comprehensive and thorough report. And you know, I really do hope that the committee will support the report's recommendations, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair and committee.
The use of ferric chloride. I mean, I used to teach electronics and I used to use it for printed circuit boards. What is its use in this operation?
Yeah, you've asked a question that I probably can't answer competently enough, I'm afraid. Ferric chloride as an input to the AD process, I think, is to balance the AD process so that we can sort of optimally manage the microbes in the fermenters to ensure that we're delivering as much biomethane as we can compared to CO2 output, and make sure that we're digesting the materials. Beyond that, because I'm not a AD plant biologist, I can't really answer in a more informed way, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I think it actually cuts down the order. I did look it up. The other point is you provide 10% of the feedstock, and the other 70 come from surrounding within 10 kilometers. Where does the other 20% come from?
So there's some flexibility in the feedstock plans for wastes that might be available in the local region from the farming that's occurring at the time. So obviously farming continually changes, and it may be that a supply of a particular waste is available locally. And we've designed the plant to help support local farms and give them options in terms of whether they want to supply energy crop feedstock, for example, whether they want to supply straw into the plant so that the straw volumes could increase, or it could be that there are other things that could be brought into the plant. One example is it could be that we use sugar beet pulp in the plant. If we're already taking sugar beet up to Bury St Edmunds and the lorries are coming back anyway, why not bring back some sugar beet pulp to go into the digester? That's an example of what might be a portion of that 20% flexibility we have in the feedstock mix.
So we now have Mrs. Amelia McNeely, Miss Anita Stone, and Mr. John Blackman, who each will have 2 minutes to speak. Can Amelia come forward? You're going to time these separately. Any order you like. But 2 minutes each. So you are. Oh, can you stay? You have.
Thank you. We all want sustainable energy sources for the future, but anaerobic digestion, with its reliance on energy crop food stocks, is not truly sustainable. That said, these sites must be situated in appropriate locations adjacent to the main transport routes where impacts to local residents and the environment are minimal. The inappropriate location of this site means that a 1 kilometre long, 6 metre wide new lorry road is required to reach it from the A1307. Over 10,500 lorry, tractor and trailer journeys per year added to the local road network, thousands of which will be on small country roads which are not suitable for these larger vehicles, sharing school bus routes. The new lorry road crosses the only bridleway providing peaceful off-road access to local villages. This bridleway is also a national route, the Harcombe Low Way, that runs to Cambridge, and therefore the impact affects users from a much wider area. It is also a historic Roman road. 46 loads per day from June through to September, potentially from 6 AM to 10 PM. The crossing point is at a high point in an open landscape, meaning that large vehicles will be seen, heard and smelt for most of the route. This lorry road will significantly impact the value of this entire 2 kilometre route for walkers, cyclists and especially horse riders forever. It is shameful that this impact has not been noted by the County Council Public Right-of-Way team. This does not represent users of this route and shows a lack of understanding of the impacts to humans, but especially horses. The further negative impacts of this application have been highlighted by many local residents. 147 local residents signed the petition against the site. We feel totally let down by the consultee responses in the planning system. You are our last hope. Thank you.
Two minutes.
I'm Amelia McNeely, a local resident, and thank you, committee, for listening to what we have to say. I did note that there was a protocol breach in that the planning did not invite the other 5 local parish councils that all objected. I just wanted to note that, but thank you for inviting us. A groundbreaking judgment by the Supreme Court was given on the 20th of June, post the date for submissions to the Planning Committee. It rejected a planning application in Horse Hill, Surrey, a project that would emit hydrocarbon greenhouse gases. And just last Friday, 2 more planning applications have been withdrawn as a result of this Supreme Court judgment. Key to the court's finding was that for projects with likely significant environmental effects, emission of greenhouse gas, for approval to be given lawfully, those decisions must be made with full knowledge of the environmental cost. Otherwise, such decisions, so the Supreme Court found, would lack the necessary democratic legitimacy. I would challenge the interpretation by the planning officer of the statement by the Cambridge County Council Climate Change Officer, who has indeed doubts in her report. Thank you.
Can I ask a question of you, Chair or Helen? Is it correct that 5 parish councils weren't invited to address the council today, the meeting today?
Yes, it is. The notifications were overlooked by the people who sent them out to the individuals. I think the 130 plus individuals were sent notification, but the parish councils weren't.
So, Chair, how should we address that in our deliberations today?
Well, as I understand it, the parish councils were invited on Monday.
Yes, this became apparent on Monday. Clearly, West Wickham heard on the grapevine, and Bolsham Parish became aware similarly. So we did on Monday afternoon alert the other parishes. Bolsham responded very quickly and said they consider whether they wish to appear. They may have contacted Councillor Batchelor to put forward their views, or indeed West Wickham. I think you did mention, Councillor Sargent, that you had contributions from others. Haverhill did get back in touch and said they weren't available, but the point they wished to make was I think covered in the report about the potential cumulative effect of transport with the scheme that's in Suffolk within their area. I haven't heard, and I don't think Democratic Services heard from any of the other parishes, Linton, Bartlow, for example.
Can I add that had the other parishes wished to talk, their time would have been deducted from the would have been within the 6 minutes allowed to West Wickham. So I think whether that would have been an effective use of the time or a more effective use of the time than the representation from West Wickham, I think is probably unlikely, given that the written submissions from each of the parish council were covering broadly similar issues. Thank you. The final speaker, Mr. John Blackman.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, John Blackman, West Wickham resident, Blackman Agriculture Limited. I'm a plant breeder. I think this is the wrong location. Citing an AD plant at Streatley Hall is perverse. This is not NIMBYism, it's common sense. There are many locations with dual carriageway access, well clear of habitation, watercourses and aquifers. There are areas with soils and climates more suited to growing maize than this area, with access to surplus animal manures close by. We've heard about the transport issues. I think the Transport Committee should have travelled along that road. I cannot see how you can turn right from the new farm access without causing major disruption to the movement on the road. The proposal, I believe, is misleading and incorrect. The application requires 50% of the feedstock to be waste, as stated in 9.14 of your summary. By no definition can farmyard manure and slurry be considered waste, as it's always been an important source of plant nutrients for growers. Similarly, straw has a value in the nutrients it contains and is a soil conditioner when incorporated. Point 99, biofertilizer will replace fossil fuel derived fertilizer. This is a misleading statement. The operation of the Jester requires the import of large quantities of animal manures from outside the proposed catchment area. There's no animals in this area. These have a high density of plant nutrients derived from crops fed to animals, which are produced in the UK or abroad. These nutrients are ultimately derived, many of them, from synthetic fertilizers. The proposal replaces food production with energy crops, and there are more suitable alternatives such as wind power. The use of highly productive arable land to grow up to 1,400 acres of non-food crops, consuming significant quantities of fossil fuel to grow, transport and process into gas is obscene. It can only lead to further destruction of rainforest to replace the land we have lost. you.
No, thank you, Mr. Blackman. So the final speaker is Councillor Henry Batchelor, who again has 6 minutes.
Morning, everyone. Feels a bit odd sitting this side of the table, but good to see you all. So the light's gone green. I'll begin. So I'm here to back up the comments of the parish councils that I represent that have written in, and you have their comments in front of you in your papers. Specifically, those of West Wickham, Horseheath, and Bolsham, who are geographically the closest to this particular site. Obviously, you have West Wickham here today to represent you, but as has been mentioned, Bolsham and Horseheath were notified on Monday of this particular meeting, so weren't able to send anyone. So I'm going to do my best to represent their comments to you today. I'll be talking about 3 specific points, 1 being landscape, 2 traffic and access, and 3 the comments of local parish councils and members of the public who have written in as well. So firstly, I'd just like to make the point that firstly, I'm not against green energy as a principle, but I think there are some issues with this particular application that have been touched upon already by other speakers. But I'm just going to talk about the issues as I see them. So firstly, landscape. We already have an objection from a statutory consultee on the landscaping issue. And that's the other local planning authority in the area, South Cambridgeshire District Council. If you look at 6.2 of the report, you'll see that they say the plans for screening will go some way to negate the negative impacts on the landscape, but then also concludes there will still be enough harm caused by this application to warrant a refusal. They also briefly mention some concerns about the impact on the public bridleway or the Roman road. 2, traffic and access. So the new access to the A1 307 is a specific concern for us locally. Other than the fact it does cross the Roman road, so having HGVs trundling over a public bridleway obviously isn't going to be a benefit to it. But it also then adds another access to the A1 307, which is the main trunk road linking Haverhill, the A11 and Cambridge, and has a lot of congestion and a high volume of accidents on the road. Adding up to 65 additional vehicle movements onto the road at this particular point, 56 of which being HGVs, without mitigation, can't be a sensible move in our view. Also adding vehicle movements through the surrounding villages is also a significant local concern, as I believe has been outlined by some of the local comments that you've received as a committee. The officer at the beginning in her introduction mentioned residual cumulative impact on roads is a material planning consideration. And we believe this does need to be given slightly more weight in planning terms than has been so far. Moving on to objections and comments of parish councils and residents. So you would have seen from the papers, there are objections from 7 local parish councils, as well as Haverhill Town Council. If you read the comments specifically from West Wickham Parish Council in 6.29 of your agendas, West Wickham, who obviously this application was in their parish, they've gone into very specific detail about policy, which they believe is contravened by this application. So they're not just giving an anecdotal opinion, they've given you actual policy they believe is in contravention here. And specifically around their adopted neighbourhood plan, which we feel locally hasn't been given as much weight in the planning balance as it should be. Parishes, for those of you that know that have neighbourhood plans, they take a very long time and a very lot of energy from those putting them together to make them work and get them to the stage of adoption. So to go against a policy within a neighbourhood plan, I feel probably sends the wrong message to those considering going through that process. We also have 2 objections from the British Horse Society and the Ramblers Association. I appreciate they are not statutory consultees, but they do raise the same concerns as outlined by some of our statutory consultees, very specifically around the impact the proposal will have on the bridleway or the Roman road, to use its colloquial term. So in summary, again, not against the principle of the proposal, but we do feel that the proposal as it sits in front of you today should be refused almost certainly on landscaping, as we already have an objection written in black and white in your papers for you to refuse it on, but also on two other issues as well. So on the traffic from off-site field stocks, and also the impact on the bridleway itself, which, as you saw in the officer's introduction, have been given medium weight in terms of planning balance, but we feel the weight given to those two considerations should be considerably higher. So, as I said, planning is a balance. Currently, the balance the officer's putting forward to you is in favour of the proposal, but we feel there'll be a lot more harm caused by this proposal than benefit. So my suggestion is that the application should be refused. Thank you.
Any comments, clarifications? Councillor Kinderson.
Thank you. I have three questions that I want to ask. First of all, do you think that £10,000 a year as a community benefit to one organisation is appropriate, or would it a larger sum to parish councils that are impacted on a proportionate basis be a better way forward? Secondly, I think we all understand 1307 at one point was the most dangerous road in Cambridgeshire. Whether it still is, I don't know, because there's been quite a lot of effort into reducing the dangers on the road. It's not terribly clear to me currently whether the traffic actually or the use of the road is going to increase, or whether it is already being used by the vehicles in question, but on different routings, as it were. The point being that, you know, all of this stuff is being produced and transported to somewhere else already. And the third question is this: one of the objectors, in fact, I think it was Mrs. McNeely, in her written submission said about a West Oxfordshire Planning Committee decision that, and here I'm quoting, the proposed development by virtue of its use, design, scale, massing materials and siting would introduce a significant industrial development into this open countryside. Do you think that's the equivalent on this site? Do you think that that is a reason, as it were, that this committee could use for refusal were we a district planning authority?
Okay, thank you. I'll try to answer those in order. So firstly, I'm a big fan of Section 106 payments. I appreciate that's not the process for this particular application, but I believe that the community should benefit from any development, whether it's commercial, agricultural or residential, proportionately. So that means if so rather than say the applicant choosing where some benefit would go to, it should be up to the community or agreed at the planning process stage as to where, or who should receive forms of compensation for a development being built. Secondly, on the A1307, yep, absolutely. We've been very lucky through the GCP to actually secure around 35 to 40 million pounds worth of funding specifically for safety measures to the A1307. So we've had average speed cameras introduced. We've lowered the speed limit in certain areas. There's been a new roundabout introduced to slow traffic down. But still, for example, Haverhill is expanding at a rate of knots. The level of traffic isn't decreasing on the road. And I think you had a specific question about numbers of vehicles. So this application would represent an increase in traffic numbers. I believe the CCC Transport Assessment Team has indicated that in their comments as well. So we believe that adding more traffic onto this road, and more importantly, a new access onto the road, makes the application unacceptable. In terms of the other case that has been referenced by Ms. McNelly, I believe obviously that does set a precedent. Obviously, every planning application needs to be judged on its own merits and demerits. But absolutely, there are other examples around the country where similar types of facilities have been refused, and to add balance, they probably have been approved as well. But absolutely, I think there are other examples that we can draw upon.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just one very quick question as the local member. We're told by Cambridgeshire Highways that they believe that the junction they have has been put forward for that on the 1307 will meet all the necessary requirements and safety issues. So why, if we go, we need to follow what our officers tell us, why do you think that that particular junction will not do what our highways officers say it will do?
So I think the highways officers say the proposal is acceptable. I don't think they're going to say it's going to benefit the road in any way whatsoever, but they're saying what's being proposed is acceptable in planning terms. I mean, adding another junction with, I think, slow-moving HGV vehicles that will not only be turning left onto the oncoming traffic, they'll be turning right, crossing 2 lanes. Obviously, I appreciate you have to follow the guidance of the officers that are offering you advice here. But obviously, you've heard local opinion on this, and obviously planning weight can be apportioned differently. So what we're saying locally is that we feel more weight should be applied to the local opinion that adding more traffic to the road on a very dangerous road isn't a sensible move, and more weight should be given to that in the planning balance. But as I say, I fully appreciate that you are being given a steer by the county council's highways and transport team, and I think in the introduction the officer said there is an officer from the county's transport team here that might be able to give you their reasoning behind their conclusion that this is acceptable. But obviously you've heard the local view on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Batchelor, I'd just like you to comment on something, my observation. So you mentioned the Greater Cambridge shared planning's objection, and the objection sort of focuses significantly on the facility itself, and the impact of the facility in terms of the landscape. We heard one of the public speakers reference the actual access road as well. Would you care to comment about what the impact of the access road would be on the landscape too, as well, from your perspective, your local perspective?
Sure. So I think the main concerns on landscape are about the actual siting of the site rather than the access road, albeit the access road will have a negative impact because you're essentially putting a road that HGVs will be coming up and down on through the middle of the countryside, crossing bridleways and through open space. So it absolutely will have an impact, but more on a traffic side of thing. You're going to add traffic to an area that currently doesn't have traffic, so you're going to be seeing large vehicles moving up and down. But the main concern of the landscape officer, which we share, is the actual siting of the facility itself within the landscape, and the fact the landscape officer doesn't believe that can be overcome with screening or what is being proposed currently.
Thanks. Sorry, back to the road again. You mentioned that Haverhill was growing at a rate of knots, and I think we all are aware of the scale of development, but that does not seem to be a block on the use of the 1307. So it would appear that residential development is acceptable and the subsequent increase in traffic from that residential development. And I wonder if you had any views on that in relation to this application, which obviously is slightly different traffic.
Indeed, and it's worth noting that the vast majority of the A1307 is in Cambridgeshire. So obviously when planning applications are approved over the border in Suffolk, the Cambridgeshire highways are consulted as a matter of course, but ultimately the road from the Suffolk border all the way through Cambridgeshire is the responsibility of Cambridgeshire County Council. Obviously, we on the Cambridgeshire side of the board think more weight should be given when housing, large-scale housing development is granted, over our borders that will affect us more directly than anybody else. But in terms of the type of traffic, absolutely, we're going to be this application will be adding, a significant number of HGV vehicles to what is in the larger single track A road, which links a major settlement to, the A11 and other trunk roads. There are many logistics companies in Haverhill that currently use the road with their HGVs, and it is that is a concern for us in Cambridgeshire. So adding more of those vehicle types will certainly, in our view, not assist that matter.
There is an additional short letter that the Democratic Services Officer will read. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to confirm, this comes from Councillor Daunton, and the Chair has exercised her discretion to allow this to be read out. As County Councillor for one of the divisions, Fulbourn, which borders on the area in which the proposed facility is to be sited, I would like to raise the following concerns. A number of villages in my division would appear to fall within the stated 10-kilometre radius of the site referred to in paragraphs 3.3. These are small settlements served by narrow roads and already subject to significant HGV movements, either HGVs going to and from light industrial sites in Fulbourn or to nearby grain stores. In addition, there is the regular movement of agricultural vehicles. I am concerned at any knock-on effect of the development of a facility of this size would have on traffic. The movement of traffic would inevitably be over a wide area. In addition, I'm concerned about the proposed hours of operation. A start time of 7 a.m. and an end time of 7 p.m. in normal periods would mean that vehicles accessing the proposed site would actually start to move to and from it much earlier than that. Harvest time is always busiest, but as the officer report indicates, harvest time is spread over a significant part of the year. Villages within areas of busy harvesting are already well aware of the disruption to normal life early morning HGV movements can cause.
Thank you. So we now move to the debate. So has anybody got any contribution to make to the debate? Councillor.
Could we hear from the traffic officer about his or her assessment, and in particular the comment that is written about the traffic peaks, and they're satisfied it would not cause significant detriment to the operation and safety of the local highway network? What does significant detriment mean in this context?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jez Tuttle. I'm the Transport Assessment Manager at Cambridgeshire County Council. I have here one of my team, Hannah Seymour Shove, who is the officer that dealt with this application. Given the questions that you've asked or have been asked throughout these discussions, it seemed to fall into broadly a couple of categories, which is increase in HGVs and also highway safety. So I think I'm right in saying that in terms of the increase in HGVs, above and beyond what's going through along the A1307 at the moment, they are not huge. They're not massively significant. The A1307 is a road that takes HGVs already. We know this. So as a highways authority, we could not object to the application on the basis that there are more lorries running down a route which a lot of lorries run down anyway. In terms of the HGVs which would be running through the local roads, I believe that's about 4 extra vehicles in the peak, over and above what would be expected from an agricultural use. According to the transport assessment, the majority of vehicles would be using the 1307 new access, so directly. So again, it is 4 vehicles, but as a highways authority, it would be very difficult to us to object to that relatively low number of vehicles on the local road network. In terms of highway safety, the proposed new junction, whilst it's never a brilliant idea to put new junctions on roads of this nature, we can't stop people doing it if we don't have any good reason. The proposed access junction was some considerably discussed at the time, I believe, and in fact, I think they first didn't propose a right turn lane. I think we required them to put a right turn lane in because of the safety issues with vehicles waiting in the middle of the road and any vehicles behind not realizing they're stopping to turn. So that's why the right turn lane has been proposed. The junction has been through the safety audit process. It was safety audited by an independent safety auditor and reviewed by the Highways Development Management team, who accepted the responses the applicants consultants had to the couple of issues that were raised with that junction, and that's been agreed to be taken forward at detailed design stage, and is to do with visibility of signing and marking, so making sure the junction is visible so that vehicles know that slow moving vehicles may be pulling into the right turn lane. So that has gone through due process, and that is now considered to be acceptable by the Highways Authority. In terms of accident levels, there were some accidents back in, I think, 17, 18, 19, 20. That seems to have calmed down now. We don't have the accident data for the second part of 2023, unfortunately, but I'm aware that that area of road has been reduced to a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, and also there are signs on the road now that indicates this is a high casualty area. There are also average speed cameras on the road as well, and I believe that that has actually reduced the accident rate considerably to what it was, say, 5 years ago. So taking those into consideration, the Highways Authority doesn't have any reason to object to this application on highways capacity or highway safety grounds.
That's very helpful and reassures me about the work that officers and others have done on this. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Gough.
Chair, can I take advantage of the Highways officer's presence to just ask a question about the proposed condition 18 on hours of operation? I'm pleased that the proposal is to, as I understand, to extend the definition so it includes agricultural vehicles as well as HGVs which are serving the site. I look at the reason with sort of minimizing disturbance to residents of users of the area. And while I accept that there's agricultural vehicles moving, we do know from experience of other sites you get redistribution and concentration of movement of traffic associated with feedstock coming into the site. And while, yes, much of it is coming from the A1307 into the site before it gets to the A1307, it's going to be going through local areas, many of which are small vehicles. My question is to you, the effectiveness of a condition which just references vehicles entering or leaving the site between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. daily, because a vehicle coming from a location, as Councillor Daunton mentioned, into the site to arrive at 6 a.m. may well be leaving at 5 a.m. to get there. That doesn't appear to be a condition which minimizes the disturbance to residents and users. And I'm just interested in your comments as to whether that really is effective in doing what it's purported to do.
It's a difficult one in highways and transport terms because it sort of crosses over to the boundaries of environmental impacts as well, which, whilst are always looked at as part of an application, it's not something that we strictly look at as a highways authority, although there are arguments being made that we should look at that in a sort of more detailed manner. All I would say is that going back to your comment about concentration of vehicles, if the vehicles were leaving somewhere at 5 in the morning, they would be more spread out there and they would only converge at the times when they could enter the site. So if they were allowed in at, say, 7, they would converge at 7. So that would be where the greatest impact would be on that one area. Otherwise it would just be single vehicles potentially coming from all directions, which would be a single vehicle passing, say, down a country road. So that's the only thing I can really say about that, is that the concentration wouldn't be before a certain time, and that before that time they would be spread out to wherever they're coming from or going to.
Can I come back? But that's sort of not quite the nature of the way in which the crops are actually passed to these sites, though, isn't it? You just basically crop one single area at a time and go back and forth, isn't that? So that was my comment about the concentration. Is it tends to be, it doesn't randomly come from a number of different sources. It comes from particular locations sequentially as you harvest those particular locations. So you could end up, could you not, with one particular location being cropped very early in the morning, with a number of vehicle movements from that at unreasonable times for the local residents.
I would agree that's entirely possible, that there is no restriction on 4 vehicles in a sort of line coming in down a certain route. No, not with the way the application currently stands.
Yeah, so I guess sorry to, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I guess I have a little concern, therefore, that actually that condition as written at the moment does not achieve what the objective is, which is to sort of minimize the disturbance to residents and users of the area. Not the area immediately adjacent to the facility, because we, from the site visit, know that there are few residents of that, but of the surrounding vehicles which will be coming through villages which are adjacent to the sources of the feedstock. Seems to me that 6 a.m., and I think Councillor Daunton raised this in her comment, 6 a.m. invites movements through the villages adjacent at really unreasonable times of the morning. The officers would like to comment on that.
If I may, Chair, because I think, as Jez said, it does drift towards the environmental rather than traffic. I do understand what Councillor Daunton is saying, that if the farms around her area and others within the 10-kilometre radius are contributing feedstock to the proposed plant, and she's made reference to harvest times. Well, I think perhaps we're maybe losing sight of the fact that those fields are growing crops anyway, and those crops will be harvested when they're ready to be harvested, and that could be, it goes with the weather. And I think everybody who lives in the countryside will know that that can go on, as the applicant has suggested, until 10 o'clock. So I think, regardless of whether this plant went ahead, if it goes ahead, there would still be crop movements. And as you say, when they're working on a field, they're working on a field, and then they'll move on to another field, depending on the nature of the crop. So I think the upshot might be a slight redistribution of vehicles transporting crops from farms in the catchment area, or the crop residues such as straw. But overall, those fields are still going to be contributing tractors and trailers or other means of moving crops, which is obviously currently uncontrolled by the planning process.
Okay, that point actually fits in quite well with the point that I was about to make, in as much as Mr. Tuttle, thank you for attending. The site does look after predominantly localized, the local area specifically. Those farms locally are producing produce, which is being transported already and will be, irrespective of this site being approved. Would it be your assessment then, under that circumstance, that with this local site being in place, what traffic is taking produce from those fields is actually travelling a shorter distance and therefore using less of the highway overall, than would otherwise be the case.
Yeah, the transport assessment does allude to a lot of crops being bought in locally. So if those crops were to go to other places outside that sphere of influence, as it were, then yes, there would be a net decrease in vehicle miles travelled by those vehicles.
I think my phone has just been stolen. I was going to ask in a slightly different manner in which I was just going to ask whether it was Helen or Jez, but whether the movements that have been quoted counted the movements of crops going away that are being grown at the moment. So effectively just been answered. Thank you.
Could you whether the crop movements in the table are the total crop movements or take into account any other movements that would otherwise have happened?
Well, the table in the report is based on the volume of material that the plant would require. I think they've assumed its peak capacity, even though a range was given, and it's also broken down into the type of feedstocks and also the digestate. Certainly, the element that is grown within the three, I suppose, green areas shown that are directly connected to Streatley Hall Farm, and within the 10-kilometre radius, they are, if they're growing crops or their crop residue is feeding the proposed plant, it's not going somewhere else. And I think that the point was made that it may be travelling a shorter distance. And I think an example would be something that the applicant mentioned, that sugar beet goes to Bury St Edmunds to be processed, and there is potential for residue to come back. But if instead of sugar beet, something else was grown in the vicinity of the plant, there would be fewer miles. And I think the other element is straw is quite a big component of the proposed feedstock. And currently a lot of that goes to the plant at Sutton near Ely for incineration with energy recovery, but wouldn't produce the digestate as a secondary product. So clearly the distance to Sutton in Ely is a lot more than would be 10 kilometres to this plant.
That's very helpful, Helen. Are there any other points members would like to raise? Ask the highways representatives. No further debating points. Okay, so if we have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation as set out in the report. Sorry? Okay, right. Okay, so we now move to the debate.
Thanks, Chair. This application is a very interesting one and is, I don't know if I speak for other members of the committee, but I bet I do. It's really difficult because we are sat being asked by local people to change the balance that is being accorded to the application and the benefits and the disbenefits. And I think that is a really difficult thing to do if we do not have backing from our own officers in relation to the various issues that have been raised, for example, noise, odour, traffic, highway safety, and so on. The only place that we can really support an objection is in relation to the comments from the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service, who themselves are slightly soft about their objection because they include in the objection, if planning permission is granted, further details required, and further on, the harm is considered less than substantial in relation to the significance of listed buildings. So as a planning committee, obviously, it is down to us to decide whether the balance should be tipped the other way and that we should refuse this. And then we have to consider what happens if we do refuse it, because I've got a lot of sympathy actually with the applicant, who is doing his very best in extraordinarily difficult circumstances to do what farmers are always being told to do, which is to diversify as if it was something really easy to manage overnight, and it isn't. So I'd be very interested to hear what other members have to say. But I think it does ultimately come down to, is the impact on the landscape sufficient grounds to refuse the application, notwithstanding the concerns from local residents, which I think we all completely understand. What is a planning inspector going to decide to say if this is refused and goes to appeal?
Any further comments? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I agree with Councillor Kindersley. You know, there is an awful lot in this where we've got to look at our officers, what they're telling us, but then you can fully understand the views of the local residents and the local councillor. But I haven't heard anything that makes me today, so far, consider where we can legitimately refuse the application. As has already been said with regard to South Cambridgeshire and the Greater Cambridge Partnership, they have said about the landscaping, but we've already been told that they will produce another landscaping plan to be agreed with the county council before the development can proceed. So I would hope that following that, if the decision is to approve, that the landscaping proposals for this particular site would take into account everything that has been raised at this particular meeting. But I'll wait to see what other councillors say before I make a final decision. Thank you, Chair.
Corney.
Thank you, Chair. I have to agree with what I've heard so far. It's certainly a very difficult application, and for those of us that sit on planning committees elsewhere as well as here, very often we have applications that we sometimes have to go with, even though we don't like them. And I think this is probably going to be one of those cases. Where our heart sort of tells us it's no, but sort of logically looking at them, it's going to be very difficult to defend if we go against it. I'm not confident enough to make a proposal yet, but I don't know if we've heard some of the conditions sort of being questioned. I'm not sure, the community fund, is that something we can condition further? So I'm looking at Helen at the moment. I'm not sure if that's something you can come back on and give us a bit more of a steer on.
So in relation to the community fund, that is something between the applicant and the local community. You've heard from Helen in the consideration of the Section 106 contributions that for this application, the test to require Section 106 contributions is not met in this case.
Gough.
Yeah, so just to go on from the comments which Councillor Kindersley said, I tend to agree. It's sort of, having been to the site, it's difficult to deviate from the sort of rather nuanced position which South Cambridgeshire District Council provided, in that I do think that one issue which has been raised today, we've had a number of parish councils who've raised concern about this, and you've heard my doubts about the conditions and the effectiveness of some of those conditions when actually reality meets and this facility is operational. It does strike me that one likely consequence of this application, should it be given permission, is that it would be desirable to have some sort of forum for going forward, whereby local parish councils, local residents could make kind of concerns known to the applicant. And also the applicant would also, I think, benefit from this. We've seen in other waste facilities which we have around the county where these forums are established, which do act as a focal point for raising concerns and the applicant explaining what is going on. I note in the report that there was no mention of such a forum being established here. And again, I don't know whether we could condition such, but I would see that if we were minded to give permission today, that I would strongly recommend that such a forum be applied as a condition to help the dialogue on an ongoing basis between the communities and all the parish councils and the applicant, which I think would benefit everyone.
Thank you. Helen, could you comment on whether that would be possible?
Yes, it is something that is a feature of major minerals and waste sites where certainly it's in their early days of establishment, a channel of communication between the operator, local community representatives and the regulators. And if this were to go ahead, I would imagine there'd be quite a lot of relevance to the Environment Agency from a regulatory point of view. The general format for such liaison groups is that they're generally chaired by the local county councillor for the area. The local district councillor for the area is usually represented, and as many relevant parishes who might be potentially affected, and also county planning minerals and waste officer. And as I said, certainly for waste sites, the Environment Agency. Occasionally there'll be another body with an interest, if, for instance, Natural England, if there happened to be a nature conservation aspect. The way we generally run them is the administration falls to the applicant in terms of arranging them, arranging the venue, and any note taking and distribution of admin. It's going back a number of years, but some members on the committee may recall we considered an application for a biomass burner at Warboys about 2019, never got built, but we did have a planning condition that required, it was framed in such a way that it required the instigation of a liaison meeting. So if members were minded to approve and wanted that condition, we've got one we could draw from experience of one that has been found acceptable before.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite encouraged by the additional access that's been identified with the central lane for turning right onto the site to increase safety of access. As far as the comment that was made earlier about the length of route for the new road going from that access point to the site itself, my thoughts on that were that if that route was shortened, then the site would be more prominent within the local environment, which would then not necessarily be appealing to local residents. In my opinion, the localization of processing of produce within the specific area increases environmental benefits, and there's the net reduction of highways traffic overall, considering that localization. the reintroduction of byproduct to the agricultural land, together with generation of energy. Consideration, I believe, has been given to the Roman Road and Bridleway to give them priority of access. And the chalk stream also has been taken into consideration to be protected. So with all of that put together, I would certainly be happy to propose acceptance of this.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Can Councillor Kindersley speak?
Thank you. Perhaps we could have some legal advice on a proposal to accept the application subject to agreement between the local parish council's local member and the applicant in relation to satisfactory community funding.
As I said before, in relation to the community funding, I view that that is a issue between the applicant and the community in terms of what we could require the applicant to do. So in terms of what we could ask for under Section 106 contributions, it's something different to that.
Yes, it is not Section 106. It is a voluntary agreement entered into between the local community and the applicant. Certainly the applicant made reference to it very specifically. The local member was extremely supportive of a community funding scheme. And so I think that, you know, we should give them the opportunity to see how far that can be extended, notwithstanding the fact that it isn't technically part of the planning consent.
Would you be happy for that to be part of a condition for a local forum to discuss other matters?
I would be happier. I mean, I think that the local liaison group is an excellent idea. And indeed, Helen and I meet at regular intervals at the Barrington liaison group meeting in my patch. So yes, and they work very well. They're very useful for local residents, particularly immediately adjacent to sites, to come along and give updates. But what I'm suggesting here is that we agree the application subject to agreement between the local parish council's local member and the applicant with regard to community funding.
Corney.
I think just adding to that, maybe is that something that could be done. We can condition the liaison group. That maybe is that something that can be picked up within the liaison group. And it's taking it away from obviously legally we can't condition the funding at the moment. So I'm just trying to overcome that. But I think I just to add to the liaison group as well. I think obviously the War Boys one that's mentioned. I've chaired that, and I know I came into the landfill site there much later on, but I know that initially the liaison group was very, very effective, and certainly the locals held the then applicant their heels to the coals. So it was a very good way of moving forward.
I don't think there's a problem with securing a liaison group, but I would be very concerned about linking or making dependent the agreement of that group on something that isn't necessary to make the development proposal acceptable. I'm not quite sure what the sort of sanction would be, because I think the applicant was quite clear that he had a specific recipient in mind for an annual donation connected to the memory of his father, where I think the community were looking for something a bit more of a pot that could be distributed. I mean, I know, Councillor Kindersley, I know you know that Rugby or Cemex, as they now are at Barrington, have a sort of community pot, but they are a multinational organisation and sort of do that totally outside the planning system. Landfill operators, I think they're obliged to put something into a pot, but this is a rather different scenarios. So again, I don't know whether Carolyn's got anything to add, but I'm not sure it could be embedded within a liaison group, the purpose of which would be to, I suppose, discuss operational matters. Although I acknowledge that at Barrington, they obviously do like to blow their own trumpet, the CEMEX, and say which church spire appeals they've donated to and such like.
Chair, if I can come back with some element of clarity, I don't think the agreement I'm suggesting has anything to do with the liaison committee, firstly. Secondly, the reason why I'm pursuing this is because in my division, and indeed in the wider South Cambridgeshire district, there are a significant number of solar farms, and they all make community contributions, usually through the parish councils. And I'm thinking particularly of Shingae-cum-Wendy, Croydon, Arrington, Meldreth, Melbourne. You know, the list is pretty endless, actually. And it is that form of community funding that I'm seeking to be agreed before consent is granted between the local parish councils, the local member, and the applicant.
So that would imply that you want to defer the decision until such an agreement is in place.
Well, I did think about that at some length, Chair, as you can probably imagine, and I did feel that it was probably unreasonable to ask all of these people to hang on for another month or 2 months whilst discussions are undertaken. And given that the local member and yourself would be overseeing the process, I have every trust in both of you that a satisfactory conclusion could be arrived at.
But
notwithstanding the concerns being felt by officers around the table.
I think it's very difficult to, you say it's a voluntary agreement. It would be very difficult to make that any contribution at all mandatory. If you're simply asking that there be a discussion with a view to making a local contribution over and above the contribution to the nursery that's already been mentioned.
No, I don't think I am suggesting that. I'm suggesting that consent be granted subject to satisfactory agreement.
And how would you define satisfactory?
Sorry, Councillor, I'm just going to interject here. It's not something we can legally do in terms of granting it subject to that. It is a voluntary arrangement that the applicant has mentioned. The applicant is obviously here today and has heard all the concerns that have been raised in relation to, discussing with the local residents as to where the community pot may go, and the applicant's free to take that on board and think about what he would like to do with that community fund, and he may well, as part of the liaison group, raise that there, but it's not something we can condition in that way.
So if I sum up, am I correct, officers can correct me, that it would be possible to put a condition on for a local liaison forum, but that to make the planning permission conditional upon there being a non-zero agreement in terms of a contribution to the local community is not possible. Satisfactory seems to me too vague to make it a planning.
I mean, if I may return to the point I made before, in terms of minerals and waste development, planning conditions need to meet the tests that are in the National Planning Policy Framework, and also legal agreements need to be necessary to make the proposed development acceptable. And it's not necessary. It will be obviously very nice to have, particularly if you're a member of the local community, but it isn't necessary to make the proposal acceptable in planning terms. I haven't got it to hand, but I'm fairly sure there is a paragraph in the NPPF about the use of planning conditions and legal agreements.
It seems to me that the condition that Councillor Kindersley is proposing, satisfactory, would be a way of essentially kicking the ball down the road almost indefinitely, were agreement not to be reached by the parish councils over the amount that was offered.
I mean, that agreement could be time limited. You know, if they have to come to a conclusion by 2 months or something, then we'd have to come back. But in any case, I can see that officers are absolutely determined that this is not going to happen. But I do rather question why it is that solar farms in particular are, you know, that this happens in relation to solar farms. And this is going to have a significant impact locally, according to the parish councils and the local member. So it wouldn't seem unreasonable.
To sort of
Councillor Wilson.
round this, could we add some, if we do vote to approve this subject to the conditions set out in paragraph 12.1, plus the setting up of the liaison committee, that there is a further recommendation that the committee encourages the local member to coordinate a meetings of the parishes and the applicant with a view to creating a generous community grant over the period of the development. And if we can't do that, if we can't put it as a condition legally, then at least we could have within our records that that is what we have concluded as a committee.
That concluded. Solar farms. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Officers really can see why members want this, and as Helen said, can see the benefit of it, but we also have to take the legal advice that it isn't legally possible. However, what we could do is we couldn't add a condition, but we could add an informative, almost exactly what Councillor was just saying, that what members discussed and what members would like and would expect. And we have similar informatives from consultees like Anglian Water, where they haven't actually conditioned something, or there are conditions, but then they want the applicant to know these additional matters. And so we can come up with wording of an informative. My suggestion would be that we do that outside of this meeting and then get approval of chair and perhaps local member on that, because we also would need to consider the slight amendment to condition 18 to make sure that the use of tractors and trailers would definitely be covered in the vehicle movements, if that's acceptable.
Okay, based on that final piece of discussion, can I ask for clarification as to whether we still require the liaison committee, and if so, what its specific purpose and target of achievement is?
Would you like me to? Yeah, I think I sort of touched on it before. I think there's a feeling from members that you believe a liaison committee would be useful, and it having experienced quite a number over the years for a variety of different sites, they have indeed proved so. It does allow representatives from the community to meet the regulators and also the the developer, often on where they're most effective. They start meeting possibly quarterly, then it drifts into sort of 6 monthly, and when everything is hopefully going well, they become victims of their own success. But hopefully they sort of engender a good communication between the operator and the parishes, which indeed I think is the case at Barrington Quarry and other examples. So the principle would be, yeah, a forum to get the relevant parties together to exchange information, be that complaints and how they're addressed, and any matters that the operator might want to bring to the table.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I think to try the meeting, I think if Councillor Wood's still happy with his proposal, and as long as the liaison group is included. And I would really urge the local members and residents to engage in that. I'm happy to second the proposal.
I have a proposal from Councillor Wood to include the 28 conditions in the agenda and the proposal, but also an additional requirement for there to be a liaison forum and a advisory to be agreed on the contribution to the local community and the capture. Yeah. Yes. And we have a proposer and we have a seconder. Can we take a vote on that, please? All those in favour of the proposal? I think that's unanimous decision in favour. Thank you very much. As the permission, the proposal is permission is grown. Okay. Right, so we're coming up to 2 hours after the start of the meeting. I'm going to have an adjournment until 12:30. Well, you want to, well, let's say 20 past 12. That gives you just over 10 minutes. Recommence. Okay, so item 5 on the agenda. We have before us the Enforcement and Monitoring Update Report. To take us through that, we have Alex Rankin, Planning and Compliance Officer. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I'm Alex Rankin, Planning Compliance Officer, and I'm here to present the Enforcement Update Report in Beale Field's absence. The report before members today gives an update on formal enforcement action taken and key investigations that the Enforcement and Monitoring team have been working on since the previous report was presented to members on the 20th of March 2024. As set out in the report, officers have delegated authority to undertake formal enforcement action and serve notices in consultation with legal services, provided that they are reported to this planning committee. So section 2 of the report provides detail of the 2 notices served since the previous report. These are a breach of condition notice served at the former Allen Skip Hire site at 10 Mile Bank, Littleport, and an enforcement notice served in relation to a site off Mill Road, Fen Drayton, which has subsequently been appealed. And further information on these cases is in section 3 and 4 of the report. The team is also still awaiting decisions from the Planning Inspectorate on 2 enforcement notices that were served by the team on the 5th of October 2023 at the Pig Unit Ellington and on the 16th of November 2023 at the land behind Corcus Crisps, both for the unauthorised importation and processing of waste, and both of which were subsequently appealed. Following this committee, copies of the update report will be sent to the local members and each of the parish councils. This is in respect to the updates given to the enforcement investigations detailed in sections 3 to 6 of the report, and local members are kept updated at key stages of ongoing investigations where a breach has been confirmed. There are no amendments to report or updates since publication, and there is no recommendations in the report, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the Enforcement and Monitoring Report?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just with regard to Little Hearth site at Ellington, the pig unit at Hearth Farm, Thrapson Road, Ellington, as I understand it as the local member, works are still going on at that particular site. Is there anything that the county council can do with regard to that, even though they've submitted a an enforcement notice? Oh, sorry.
Through you, Chair, thank you. I have just been discussing with legal services the issue that we have with the length of time that appeal decisions are taking and what happens in the meantime. There is the facility to serve a stop notice, which would need to accompany enforcement notice, and we could explore that, but we would have to go to the site and look at what the breach is now, and I think it would just complicate the situation. I've also been discussing with legal if there's any way that we can ask the inspectorate to speed up these decisions, because since we served the notice, we know that changes have happened on that site and the other site, the Corcus Crisps site, and our hands are somewhat tied, but we are exploring it, and I'll talk to legal again after this to see what options there are. But I think to serve a further notice would require us to go and assess the site and see what's happening now, and then it might fall to a district matter as to what's happening now. It is very difficult, but it is still quite high on our agenda.
Okay, so it would be helpful if you could have further discussions with Councillor Gardner. Any other points? Thank you for that. So we've been asked to note the report, which we duly have.
Can I just add, now that we have noted the report, that an awful lot of work goes into these reports and indeed the enforcement action and investigations that lie behind them. I wouldn't want officers to think that we weren't very appreciative of all the effort and work that goes into it. You know, the fact that there isn't a lot to ask about and is proof that they're doing an excellent job, and long may it continue.
Yeah, thank you. I'd endorse that. Final item, item 6. So this is we now move on to the final item, which is a summary of the decisions taken under delegated powers. Can I ask members if they have any questions on those decisions? No. Thank you. So thank you, members. We've asked to note the report, and we duly have. And that concludes the meeting this morning. Thank you all very much for what was a very difficult but good